The moment was electric with anticipation as Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table of the live talent show, his signature critical gaze sweeping over the performers. The studio was alive with energy, the audience waiting for the next contestant. But what happened next was something no one could have expected. Least of all Simon. As the contestant stepped forward, a hush fell over the room. The host, with a dramatic flair, introduced the individual with a statement that would forever change the course of the evening. This contestant is Freddie Aguilar's hidden son. There was a stunned silence before the audience erupted in gasps. Simon's face, typically composed, froze in disbelief. His eyes widened, and his mouth opened slightly, unable to process the gravity of the announcement. The room, usually filled with the usual rhythm of banter and comments, became a theater of shock. For a moment, time seemed to stop as Simon absorbed the revelation. He sat there, rooted to the spot, struggling to come to terms with what he had just heard. As the show continued, Simon's reaction remained etched on his face. His famous confidence, which often dominated the screen, was replaced by an unusual vulnerability. The other judges attempted to continue as normal, but Simon was visibly distracted, his mind racing with questions. Was this some kind of publicity stunt? How could such a secret have remained hidden for so long? His eyes occasionally darted towards the contestant, who seemed equally nervous under the bright lights. The young man, who had just revealed his famous parentage, stood on stage, trying to gather his composure. The audience's curiosity was palpable. Their collective gaze focused on Simon, waiting to see how he would respond to this extraordinary revelation. The air was thick with suspense. Simon had built his career on making snap judgments, on reading people's reactions and character in an instant. But this time, there was no script, no framework to fall back on. The contestant's lineage, a piece of pop history now uncomfortably intertwined with the show's future, had left Simon frozen, incapable of offering his usual incisive critique. For the first time, it wasn't about performance or talent, it was about family, legacy, and the unexpectedness of life. The moment hung in the air, charged with emotion, as the world watched, waiting for Simon to speak. The backstage moment that followed was no less dramatic. As the cameras stopped rolling, Simon retreated to the privacy of a dimly lit room, his thoughts still reeling. He was alone now, a rare instance where he could process the news without the public gaze. The producer, his colleague in this whirlwind of surprises, handed Simon the official DNA test results confirming the contestant's identity. It was real. The words on the paper were a stark truth. The contestant was, indeed, Freddie Aguilar's son, the product of a hidden past that had been kept from the public eye for years. Simon's fingers shook slightly as he turned the paper over, as if expecting the information to change or for something to shift, but it didn't. It was undeniable. Simon's face was hard to read as he sat down, his mind spinning. He wasn't accustomed to being blindsided, especially not by something so personal. The world of celebrity and show business, a domain he had mastered, had suddenly turned into something far more complex and emotional. He had dealt with egos, stage parents, and publicity stunts, but this was different. This was family. The gravity of the situation hit him as he reflected on how much of life's truths were hidden, buried beneath the surface of fame. Could the contestant, who had grown up in the shadows of such a powerful legacy, really be ready for the public spotlight? And could Simon, who had built his career on judging the worth of others, rise to the occasion and offer the guidance this young man would need? It was a moment of self-reflection where Simon questioned his own role in the unfolding drama. As the minutes passed, the world outside the room continued to turn, but for Simon, the weight of the situation felt heavy, and he knew he had to find the right words when the time came. On stage once again, the young man, Freddie Aguilar's son, stood under the bright spotlight, nervously awaiting Simon's response. The tension in the air was palpable as the host turned the microphone towards Simon, asking him for his thoughts on the revelation. The audience waited, the silence stretching thin as Simon finally rose from his chair. His eyes, once filled with sharp critique, now reflected a deeper contemplation. His voice, usually so commanding, was tentative as he spoke, revealing the vulnerability he had kept hidden for so long. He began by asking Freddie's son how he felt about being thrust into the public eye so suddenly. The question wasn't just about the spectacle of the moment. It was a genuine inquiry into the emotional toll of carrying such a legacy. Freddie's son hesitated before answering, his voice cracking with the weight of everything he had just learned. He explained how he had grown up in the shadows, never knowing the full truth about his father's identity, and how his life had been shaped by the secrets of his parentage. But now, with the truth out in the open, he had a chance to prove himself on his own terms. Not as the son of a famous musician, but as an individual with his own story to tell. The emotional sincerity in his voice broke through the tension in the room, and Simon, for the first time that night, seemed moved. He nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the courage it took to stand before the world and reveal such a personal truth. The audience, who had been holding their breath, now exhaled collectively, touched by the raw honesty of the moment. Simon, ever the critic, had not given his typical harsh feedback. Instead, he had asked the real questions, the ones that mattered most. Later, as the show concluded, Simon found himself alone once more, this time in the quiet of his dressing room. The evening's events played out in his mind like a film reel, each scene more surreal than the last. He sat before a mirror, his reflection staring back at him, trying to make sense of everything that had unfolded. In a way, he had been part of something far bigger than a talent show. He had witnessed a moment of profound personal revelation, one that went beyond performance or fame. It was a moment of humanity. As he studied his face in the mirror, Simon felt a pang of recognition. The contestant, now revealed as Freddie Aguilar's son, wasn't just a product of a famous musician's past. He was a person with his own dreams and struggles. For all the fame and fortune Simon had experienced, he couldn't deny that there was a certain power in embracing one's true self, no matter how complicated or painful that truth might be. As he sat there in the stillness, Simon realized that he, too, had hidden parts of himself, aspects of his own past that he kept away from the public eye. This revelation, though shocking, had forced him to look inward, to consider what it truly meant to judge someone, not just based on their talent, but on their character and their journey. It was an uncomfortable moment of self-examination, but also one that offered a glimpse of growth. Simon knew that when the time came to face Freddie's son again, he would do so with a newfound respect, understanding that talent alone wasn't enough to define a person's worth. The final scene played out in a crowded press conference room, where the media frenzy had reached its peak. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the room buzzed with energy. Freddie Aguilar, now faced with the public revelation of his hidden son, stepped forward to address the crowd. He stood at the podium with a calm demeanor, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride, relief, and a touch of sadness. As the media pressed him for answers, he spoke with grace, acknowledging the truth of the situation and explaining how he had kept his son's identity hidden for so long. There was no bitterness in his voice, just the quiet acceptance of a past that could no longer be ignored. He expressed his hope that his son would be able to carve his own path, free from the shadow of his famous father. There was a certain dignity in Freddie's words, a recognition that while family secrets could be painful, they also held the potential for healing. The press conference, though intense, was a moment of closure. Freddie's son, now thrust into the limelight, stood beside him, a little less nervous and a little more confident. The world had just learned the truth, but it was clear that the journey was far from over. As the questions died down and the reporters began to disperse, Freddie and his son shared a quiet moment of connection, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Simon, watching from a distance, saw not just a hidden son, but a man beginning to embrace his own story. It was a powerful reminder that, sometimes, the greatest stories were the ones we kept hidden.